Well, good morning. Happy December, at least coming up. Is it today or I think it starts tomorrow? I'm Dick Wagner. With me also is Bill Giannone, the other co-founder of the CREST network. And as we do usually once a month, we present a webinar where we have compiled a list of 6 or 8, sometimes 10 questions that our members or even non-members have sent in to us or asked us, and we thought they were fairly compelling. So we've listed them here. Bill, for your information, the very first question I changed this morning, because I'll tell you later on why, but so we have a very small change to the presentation. So that if I can get to that first question, first question is, well, first off, my marketers seem to be all over the place. In other words, it's helter-skelter. They don't have a format or a process. They just kind of wing it. And so the question that I was asked recently, is there a more formal and specific process that we can follow? The easy answer to that is yes, but the more complicated answer is every single restoration company does things differently because they have a different business model. They are in a community where their clientele is different. And so one of the things that we do, and we do it very well, I believe, is we sit down with the owner before we start coaching the marketers, and we discuss and determine exactly what their ideas are. We have some clients who absolutely do not want to call on carpet cleaners. They just think that's an absolute waste. And then we have other restoration marketers or the owners who want to call on real estate people. And so the challenge is, what trips your trigger? What do you feel the most comfortable doing? But more importantly than who you're calling on and what your target client is,
to go to my
is the question is, what gives you the most return on your investment? And more specifically, what gives you the most return as a marketer on the marketer's investment of their time? If your marketer is incredibly good at developing relationships and you have a specific and a formal process, you know who you're going to meet and see, build relationships with, and more specifically, who you are not really going to target, then that's great. You know, we have some restoration contractors that seems like they call on everybody, and you know, they're part of some networking group, and you know, they're soliciting some tire distributor to try and get them to do business with you, and that's not a great ROI. So when you want to have a very formal and specific process, then we need to schedule a time, we need to talk about it, we need to find out what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then we go from there. Billy?
Thanks, Dick. I got this one about 4 times in the last 7 days, so I figured it would be relevant for everybody. Our company had a great year. How should I calculate bonuses for my team? First of all, congratulations if you did have a great year. Congratulations, even more so, if you're considering sharing that success with the members of your team. There really is no set pat formula for how you should calculate your bonuses. It depends on the type of business you do. It depends on the compensation that your people already get. And it depends on just about how generous you want to be. When I worked on Wall Street, I'm sure you guys have read stories in the past about how Wall Street bonuses tend to be very excessive. Well, a lot of that is because guys would work 80 or 90-hour weeks for a flat salary. They're not hourly employees, so they're just compensated based on here's what you're going to make for the year. And then they hope and pray and rely on a very, very large bonus to reflect their productivity for the year. I worked with guys who made $50,000 or $60,000 salaries who got several $100,000 in bonuses. So a multiple of 3 or 4 times their yearly salary. That in our industry would probably be a little ridiculous, but it's something just to understand. Are your employees expecting and counting on a bonus as part of their, what I'll call implied compensation? We tell guys, oh, you're going to get something at the end of the year if things go well. Well, what are we telling them that for? Are we telling them that because you want them to work really hard, or you're telling them that because you're paying them less? My attitude would be, if you're paying them less and you know that you've got them cheap, the bonus should be higher because their overall compensation should reflect their effort. So if you've got hourly guys and they get overtime and they already get commissions, then obviously those guys should not be compensated as well on a bonus. The idea about bonuses is that shared success. It's exactly the mindset you have. You want to take your success and you want to make sure you recognize people for their efforts. So let's think about it that way. Let's look at our staff from the very top to the very bottom and look at how those people are compensated, if they're being compensated fairly for what they're doing in the first place, and then what was their relative role in your success. You know, a lot of times we look at the guys out in the field, or we look at the salesmen or marketers, and we give them a lot of credit for what happens, but we sometimes forget, you know, those office people who chase down the money, or that person who's talking to the adjusters. They've got a hell of a lot to do with your overall success. Maybe they didn't bring in any business, but they certainly helped the cash flow. And that's, if you've listened to me over the last couple of years, that's the number one thing that either cripples or enables companies is cash flow. So let's take a really hard look, decide how much you want to give out, and then apportion that money according to who you think is already being fairly compensated. Like I said, and this is no slight to marketers or no slight to project managers, but if those people are already receiving commissions, then a bonus would just be an extra little something for them. I don't think it should be a higher percentage of their salary than, let's say, an office staff person who was very instrumental with your success. Think about it that way. And if you do have any specific questions, I've worked out quite a few compensation packages over the years for CREST members. I'd be real happy. Just drop me a line and tell me what your thoughts are. I'd be real happy to help you walk you through it. Thanks, Dick.
Thank you. Get this moved to the next one here. There we go. This is an easy question or an easy answer. I get this question a lot, especially when people subscribe to the CREST library, or crestlibrary.com. I get the question often, how many videos or how many documents or forms or articles or whatever, they see all of these different things on the CREST library. And so they want to know how much is on there, because it's pretty tough to see exactly. and they want to know how often we're adding new content. The easy answer is there are literally hundreds of videos on the CREST library. Both Bill and I and Scott Tarpley do videos regularly. Some of them, or many of them, are 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes long. They're the kind of videos for training that you can do at a sales meeting in the morning when you have your sales meetings, or when you have a staff meeting. You can watch a 5 or 6 or 7 minute video and learn, and it isn't going to consume a long time. There are tons and tons, literally hundreds of documents and articles available for you to read and study and learn from on the CRESTnetwork.com, which is the primary website. If you're a CREST member, you have a username and a password. You can go to the area where there are forms. You can also see an incredible a bunch of white papers. Many of those white papers are 25 to 40 pages, more like a college document, and they're primarily on the idea or the concept of marketing to the commercial environment. So if you really want to tackle the commercial world, that's the place that you need to go for that. And Bill and I both, Scott, Bill and I add content to the library many times a week. It's not quite every single day, but during the week, we are adding content. We have a website person that puts that on there, and right on the front page, if we write a new article or we post a new blog post, the title or the information is right on the very front page when you log on, so you can see what's there. Billy?
Thank you, Dick. What's a normal amount of work a project manager should be able to handle every week? This comes up a lot because people have different systems that they operate from. Some of the smaller companies will have a lot of reliance on one individual, and sometimes that project manager might be the salesman, he might be the production manager, he might be the operations manager, he might also be the invoice and collections person in the company. In other companies that are larger, all of those responsibilities might be broken out. But there is a capacity, regardless of whether you are the jack of all trades or you're the master of the one, there is a capacity that you can handle. Generally speaking, if your project manager is basically a salesman and is responsible for going out, and I call it the 3 S's, they sign the work authorization, they sketch the lost site, and then they scope the extent of damage. So we call that sign, sketch, and scope. If that's what your project manager does and then moves on to another project, his capacity is usually around 25 or 30 leads a month. Anything more than that would be encroaching on more than one a day. If you want them to really do their work, they're not going to be able to function trying to get to 2 or 3 different projects in a given day. That's just not going to happen. We need them to be on that job for 3 or 4 hours, making sure that the customer is fully understanding your company's processes, all the way from who's responsible to pay the bill, how they're going to help you collect the money from the adjuster, how you're going to do the work, all those kinds of things. You need to really do a good job of selling yourself. It's not enough to just walk in the door and say, okay, I'm here, sign my piece of paper, we'll suck up the water. If you're doing that now, we probably should have a chat, because that's probably costing you either a lot of time or a lot of money on the back end trying to get paid. The simpler you make it at the beginning, the harder it is at the end. And the exact opposite is true. The more complex you make the selling process and the more transparent you make it and you explain everything up front, the easier it becomes at the end. But if that's what your manager's doing and that's all he's doing, 25 to 30 leads a month is probably a max. If you find you're getting 60, 80 calls a month, you might need a second or possibly a third PM. If your PM's responsibilities also include overseeing the production, the demo, the extraction, the cleaning, and the setting of the equipment, if they're there as well on that first full day of work, then obviously we have to cut way back on your jobs. We're probably not going to be able to get to more than, let's just say, 15 to 20 a month. That would be a high number for me. If you're expecting somebody to go out and sign the work, do all that sign sketching and scoping, and then also being the production manager overseeing the quality of the work, now we're down to that person's going to be taking 2 days for every single job instead of maybe 3 or 4 hours. So when we consider that, we know that we're, utilizing them for different roles. That's perfectly okay. If that's your company's model, that's fine. But just understand that person can't get to 25 or 30 leads. He's only going to be able to get to about 15 to 20 leads. Okay. If you're taking it so far as to now having that person also included in following up with the adjuster, chasing down the money, helping to write the invoices, talking to the customers afterwards, maybe helping on some other parts of the business like reconstruction or contents. If they're doing all of that as well, they're really more of a general manager, but they're a hands-on general manager. Now I'm going to tell you that they probably can't get to more than 3 or 4 leads tops in any given month. So I'm going to shorten that period down to more like 10 to 15, from 15 to 20. Because you're asking them to put in a lot of time. They might be spending a lot of nights and weekends helping to do that paperwork that they can't do during the day because they're out on the jobs. So understand that and understand the capacity of your workers as it relates to your business flow. If you're doing 25 jobs a month and you have one person doing all that work, you have 2 options. Either you hire a second person to do that work from start to finish with that first person, or you consider splitting the responsibilities up and having someone handle maybe the first half of the work and another person takes over the second half and does more of the invoicing and chasing. That's a really good way to utilize resources to figure out what your project manager does best. And then from there, be able to make sure that that's all they're doing. So you're getting really maximum effort out of your workers. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bill. You have to really appreciate Seinfeld, and if you appreciate Seinfeld, you totally get this guy, the soup Nazi. I picture it and it's great. It says, "No maven, no soup for you." Then that's what he said, and I'm going to tell you, I probably beat this to death, but you should be using a Maven article on every visit, every time, for every type of client. And you should know that in the Maven, in that Maven library, there are articles or Maven articles on topics that would include churches and general commercial that apply to any and all commercial properties. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of them in that library. There are many on healthcare, many dozens on hospitality or the hotel industry. There are 5 or 6 dozen specifically for insurance agents, nursing homes, a couple dozen, property management. Some of you tackle or go after property managers to get condo or apartment work. Plumbers, schools and colleges and universities are all on there. There's hundreds of those Maven articles. And usually in the same breath that they're asking about Maven articles, they want to know how often we add new ones. And I can tell you, most of the Maven articles that I put on there are what we call evergreen. They're good and logical and practical to use today and tomorrow and next week and the last month as well. They don't have an expiration date. However, I try to add 1 or 2 Maven articles at least once a week. Sometimes it might go 2 weeks and then I'll add 3 or 4, but there's always enough in the library for you to choose for who you're going after. If you're calling on plumbers, you're calling on insurance agents. If you're calling on somebody besides that, go to the general commercial area, and you will find many dozens of very interesting articles. I have written probably 75% of them, but when I do not write it, but I think it's a great article, I always try to give credit to the author. But if you're a Maven or if you're a CREST member, you have access to the Maven articles, and you should really be putting your logo and your contact information at the bottom. Almost every one of these Maven articles is a 1-page article. It's very short and sweet. People won't read more than that anyway. Half of them won't barely read the whole page. But as long as you put your logo and your name and contact info on the bottom, and there's usually room for that, it's your calling card. Plus, you understand that when you're leaving a Maven article, there's nobody else in your market that leaves a Maven article. Nobody else. Nobody, it doesn't matter if you're in Connecticut or Oklahoma or New York, doesn't matter where you are, nobody in your market is using or leaving a Maven article. And so that Maven article is designed and written so that when you have your name and the logo on the bottom of it, what it does is it adds credibility to you and proves to your client that you're knowledgeable, you're familiar, you're paying attention to their industry. And I highly recommend you know what the contents of the article are when you leave it. So no Maven, no soup for you. Billy?
Thanks, Dick. We get this quite a bit since this has come out. Is there anything new in the latest S500 standard that I should know about? There are a few minor things that have changed in there. A lot of it was cleaning up some of the, I'll call it legalese that existed in the document from the major changes that took place 4 or so years ago, 5 years ago now. And when I say legalese, maybe you guys know this, maybe you don't, but when you use the word shall versus should versus may versus might versus will, those things are all terms of art. And in legal documents or in this isn't really a legal document, but it's a standard, it's a national standard. They imply different things. May means there's an option to it. Must or shall means there's really no option. So there were a couple of areas where they changed some mays to shalls or shoulds to shalls, and they've really given us a lot of strength and power. The main thing I want to address for you guys is the idea that it's no longer an option for you to test the job site before you start work. If you in your professional capacity feel that there's the possibility of asbestos containing materials, ACM, or lead present either in the paint or wherever else you would find lead, then it's incumbent on you as the professional to test those surfaces prior to starting work. That's what the standard now says. Now, we've all heard these rules of thumb, and I'm just here to tell you they're wrong. The house doesn't have to be built before 1980. That is wrong. You don't have to do that anymore. They have found asbestos containing materials in homes that were built as late as 2017. They still use asbestos in a lot of building products. There is no ban, so to speak, on the use of asbestos. That is a misnomer that's been put out there in the landscape and perpetuated a lot by adjusters who don't want you to test because they don't want you to find it. But remember, the legal and moral obligation and ethical obligation is on you to not disturb something that could cause harm to your workers or the homeowners, your clients. So pretty much the biggest, most important aspect of this standard is that it requires you to use your professional instincts and gut feelings to test whenever it's necessary. Now, what does that mean? That means that you can't just go in and start ripping out. You have to extract the water, and you have to leave any potential ACM materials undisturbed. So you need to take a sample. You need to hire, first of all, if you're not in your state, if you're not legally allowed to take samples, then you can't take the samples. You'll have to hire someone who's legally allowed to take the samples. They will then have to take those samples to the lab, and you'll have to wait for the results of the testing at the lab. In the meantime, the only thing you're allowed to do is stabilize the environment. It's your obligation to make sure that no further damage gets done. Now, how do we do that? Most of you know how to do it already. Stabilization requires the use of air scrubbers to control any air that might become contaminated or might already be contaminated. And it also allows you the ability to put dehumidification in there. We don't put air movement in, because if there is friable material, friable ACM material means the asbestos is going to get into the air and become airborne. We don't want to speed that up by adding air movement. So we don't add air movers, but we add dehumidifiers and we add air scrubbers. And we make sure that we isolate the area until we get those test results back. The good news is the insurance companies, if you're doing everything right and you have good grounds for testing, the insurance companies have to pay for the testing and have to pay for that, what we'll call stabilization period of time. They don't have to pay for it for an undetermined amount of time, though. So this isn't just, oh, let that spin for 3 months until they get back to you. No, it's incumbent on you to make sure that you test, you get the test back as soon as possible. And if you find out that it is positive, you have to let the insurance company know right away so that you can go down the road of the abatement. Whether or not your company does it, that's very, very important to you guys that you have to do that. If it's not, if it comes back negative, you just go ahead and you start your demo and everything the next day. How do we determine whether or not we're supposed to test? Well, obviously, the most simple answer is if we're going to be demoing or removing any materials that could possibly have asbestos containing materials present. The two most obvious places to find that is in drywall compound and in the glue or mastic, either underneath tile or inside the tile. It's also found on the glue behind mirrors. A lot of times you'll see black glue dots that are used to hold up mirrors and things on walls. There's a really good chance that if it's black, it's asbestos. The mastic that holds old linoleum down or old tiles down, many times that's also hot. So if you're going to be demoing anything that contains those materials, you are absolutely required to test. That's not an option anymore. That's in the standard. So let's make sure we understand that. There's small other little things they've I don't want to say they've recalculated. They've just refined the calculation for the air movers. Be very aware of that calculation. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with people on a project and they're grossly under equipping the job. You will never get in trouble for putting on the right amount of equipment as long as the equipment is doing its job. So you have two jobs. You have to put the equipment on, but then you also have to closely monitor that job on a daily basis to make sure the equipment is actually doing what it's supposed to do, which is lowering the moisture in the building and removing all of that moisture. So let's look through there, the calculations, make sure you're using the 50 to 70 square feet. Plus, if it's a class 3 loss, you're taking into consideration the amount of wall and ceiling affected space on a square foot basis, adding air movement for that. Let's also make sure that we're using the number one. We're adding one air mover. Every room starts with one before we do the calculations. So if you've got a 200 square foot room and you said you wanted to put air movers in every 50 square feet, that's 4 air movers plus 1. So that would be 5. Most of you are doing 4. That tip alone is worth tens of thousands of dollars, and it's perfectly legitimately in the scope. Those are the main things that are in there that I wanted to address. There's 5 or 6 others. For those of you who are interested, I'll be doing a webinar in January to address all of the changes. Those are the 2 most important changes that I wanted you guys to understand, though. Thanks, Dick.
Thank you, Bill. I just had this question last week from a very personable and very successful, by most standards, a very a good marketer. And this is a marketer that is a millennial. And I was shocked when this person said, I'm not on LinkedIn and I only do a little bit on Facebook. And I've changed the question slightly, but the gist of her question to me was, how important are they? Do I really need to be on LinkedIn? I mean, I'm figuring out how to do it on Facebook, but I just don't get into that. In my response after I fell off of my chair and then got back up was, your LinkedIn profile, for starters, is your resume. This person was a fairly new employee to the restoration marketing world, and very pleasant, very enthusiastic, but not on LinkedIn. Didn't even have an account on LinkedIn. And I chastised this person. I essentially said, you would never go apply for a job without either taking a resume or filling out an application. In LinkedIn, the whole concept of LinkedIn is that it's your resume. It's about you. It's not about your company. I get a kick out of people that go on and, they create an account and the name on the account is ABC Restoration or some other restoration, XYZ Restoration. It's not about the company. It's about you. And I can tell you, in this world today, that when you call on an agent or a plumber owner, or a carpet cleaner owner, or a real estate person, one of the very first things they do after you leave is they look up your name on LinkedIn and they read the details about what you have about yourself on LinkedIn. And so, is LinkedIn important? It is absolutely incredibly important, because if there's nothing there, they don't even consider that you're valid, that you're legit. They don't give you any credibility at all. And so it's really important that you do have a resume, that you have an account on LinkedIn, and that you complete all areas of the information, so that people can see you're active, you're involved, they can see your credentials, they can know what a little bit about you, what you care about. So yes, that's extremely important. And I'm going to tell you, some of you know me, I'm very political. And I can tell you that one of the things that LinkedIn is not, is they are not very political. Facebook, yes, I'll give you lots of rope. Facebook is political. I have, I don't know, 17 or 1800 friends on Facebook. The vast majority, 99% of them, think the same political way that I do. But remember, those people that are your friends, that pay attention, they follow you, they see what you share on Facebook. That's the other half of the world. Twitter, which I did not mention here because it wasn't part of their question, but Twitter is vital and critical as well. But yes, I will give you that both Facebook and Twitter are quite political. And so I don't do very much political on Facebook or on Twitter. I put information on there that's useful and helpful and valuable to the people that follow me on Facebook or Twitter. And you can follow somebody on LinkedIn as well if they post great information. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go on the record right now as saying you need to be on LinkedIn. You need to have an account. You need to have the details filled out. And that is where people go to find out about your credibility. Because remember, if you don't have any credibility, you don't sell or get any referrals. If you're calling an insurance agent and they check you out on LinkedIn and there's almost nothing on you, you aren't going to have the same level of credibility. And the more credibility you have, the more trust you have. It's not that, you have to have a doctorate. It's not, that's not what they want on there. That doesn't give you your credibility. It's about what's important to you that matters to the client. And that tells the client a lot about you. So yes, please have a LinkedIn account, and then do things on Facebook and Twitter that are meaningful to your clients. They're not a jab at Trump or a jab at Biden, that they're meaningful to your client. Billy?
Thanks, Dick. That's good stuff. I'm trying to plan my budget for next year, but I can't figure out what to plan for as revenue. How can I predict that? It's always the biggest conundrum in our industry, because our business doesn't exist with tons of 2-year or 3-year contracts with a certain purchase amount per month. We're not selling gloves, or we're not selling televisions where we know we're going to have a definite revenue generation. We could have a month where the phone just doesn't ring and we don't know why, and that could screw everything up. So I think what we have to do is we always have to create budgets in a different way. We don't want to budget ourselves in a way that tells us how much money we're going to make. I like calling them a break-even budget. I think we have to budget ourselves so that we start with all of our expenses. Let's figure out all of our fixed costs first. And this is mostly a backwards way of creating a budget. But we do know on January 1st, we're going to have certain costs that are independent of whether or not we do any work. Those costs would include rent, utilities, all of our office staff, our insurances. Think along those lines, all the things that you spend money on, regardless of whether it's for a job or because of a job. Then we're going to sit there and say to ourselves, okay, that's what our hard costs are for the year. We call them fixed costs, okay, or operating costs. Now we need to ask ourselves, how much profit, gross profit, do we make off our business? When we do a water job, do we make 60%, 70%, 80%? I'm here to tell you some bad news. If you don't know that number, you really can't create a budget for yourself, because you need to know what that percentage is, because that gross profit is the amount that pays for all those fixed costs. You don't pay your rent from the $4,000 you get from the water loss. You pay it from the $3,000 that's left over after it cost you $1,000 to do the work. So that's what you need to know. You need to know what your gross profit numbers are. You should be able to look into your QuickBooks right now, and you're late enough in the year, obviously, where you can get a really good idea. And if you look at, if you're doing your books right, you'll have all of your fixed costs at the bottom, and you'll have all of your costs of goods sold, or your what I call job costs. Those will all be, somewhere in the middle of your spreadsheet, of your P&L spreadsheet. Take the number that shows up as gross profit and divide it by the number that shows up as gross revenue. So gross profit divided by gross revenue gives you your margin. So let's just say your margin is 70%. And let's just say your fixed cost for the year are $700,000. You spend about $60,000 a month on rent, utilities, vehicles, insurance, all those things you need. Okay, well, if you spend $60,000 a month and it's going to cost you $700,000 a year to be in business, and you have a 70% profit margin, you need to generate $1 million of business to break even. So in my budget for next year, my revenue number has to be at least $1 million. So now we're not just going to put that in there and say, okay, I've got a budget. We now have to look at this year's numbers and say to ourselves, are we at that number already? If we're already at that number with a full month to go, you can feel safe in predicting that, as long as that number doesn't reflect one very large project. If you're at $1 million right now, but you did a $350,000 hotel and they just happen to call you out of the yellow pages and that's what you did, then your revenue for the year doesn't include that. Your revenue for the year is really only $650. And you just, I'll call a spade a spade. You just got real lucky. Let's understand our normal business, the normal everyday water business we're doing. That's what we should be budgeting for. So let's figure that out. If you are not near that number and you're not able to write that down as a break even, you've got two things you got to do. Either you have to really focus between now and January on ways to increase your marketing, and Dick can help you with that. Or you need to really, really look at your expenses and maybe need to try to curtail some of them going into next year. I can help you with that. But that's really the easiest way. If you're very comfortable in the last 3-4 years, you have made a really nice profit for yourself, then the easiest way to do it is just look at your last 3 years revenue, see if there's a trend. If there's an upward trend in the revenue, just use this year's number as next year's forecast. If there's an average, if you've kind of been on a roller coaster and it's been up and down, take the average of the last 3 years, and that'll be your number to put in for your revenue. So that's two ways to do it. If you're not profitable, do it the way I described first. But if you're a very profitable company, do it the simple way. Either take last year's number if it's an upward trend, or take the average of the last 3 years revenue if you're kind of on a roller coaster and stable. Okay. Hope that helped. It probably confused more of you than it helped, but if you have any questions, just reach out to me. Thanks. Thanks, Dick.
Thanks, Billy. Billy's always available. All you got to do is send him an email and he'll reach out to you and talk you through it and walk you through it. So don't hesitate to do that. I just had this this question, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, and it prompted me to write a whole dissertation or article on ways to get fire work aside from, you know, your insurance agent sending you a fire loss. And so if you go on the CRESTnetwork.com, that article about fire chasing or marketing to the fire departments or whatever, it's on there. You can read it. It's good information. If you can't find it, please send me an email and I will send you the link so you can get to it. The bottom line is you have to be a very unique individual to chase fires. You have to be caring and compassionate, and you have to set aside the emotion, because it's an extremely emotional job to chase fires. In some cities or states, some counties, it is illegal to listen to the scanner and then go off to the fire and be there while they're putting out the fire. Most of those rules say you cannot approach that client for sometimes 24 or 48 hours after the fire department leaves. So be aware of the rules in your community. But there are lots of other ways that you can go after fire work other than fire chasing. As I said, you got to have a really strong constitution to chase fires, because the people are standing on the street watching their house burn and watching the firemen chopping holes in their roof and smashing out windows and all kinds of things. And that's an emotional process. And I can tell you that 999 out of 1,000 people don't want to listen to a fire chasing marketer standing there trying to convince them to sign their contract so that they'll do the work. So there is a much better way to do this. And it really is not fire chasing. It's what marketers do. It's build relationships. And in this case, you build your relationships with the fireman and the fire chief and the assistant chief. And this morning, I was on a Zoom call with a marketer who said that the fire chief called her personally over the weekend for a fire. So when the fire chief is calling you, and you know the fire chief is already talking to the person that had the fire, that's significant. I want the fire chief to tell the homeowner that you need to use XYZ Restoration. They're great. Because that fire chief theoretically does not have any ulterior motive to recommend you. And so the homeowner or the person experiencing the fire will feel like, wow, that's credible, that's believable, and I will call XYZ Restoration because the fire chief told me. And so if you want to know more about chasing fires, talk to me, call me, reach out to me. But if you also just want to read the article, send me a text or an email and I'll send it to you. Billy?
Thanks, Dick. I want my managers to take more control of things. How can I make that happen? This is going to depend on the type of owner you are. If you are, they came up with this expression 20 or so years ago, talking about the new generation of parents, when the millennials started coming around, and they had this expression, they referred to them as helicopter parents. Those parents who would drop their kids off at school and then stand outside the window all day staring at their kid, making sure that nothing happened to their kid. I'll give you an anecdote. When I was a little kid, I think I was in first grade, and I had a note that I had to send home that said to my parents that the principal wanted to see my parents that evening. So of course I got in a huge amount of trouble before they even went there, because the assumption was that I had done something wrong. My parents then went to the principal's office only to be given some sort of award for me because I did something in first grade that most first graders shouldn't be able to do. And when my parents got home, my father said to me, just remember that that's for the next time you want to do something bad. That's the exact opposite of what happens today. Now with these helicopter parents, they are so in their children's business and they're always seeking to defend the children. So are you a helicopter boss? If you do not give the freedom to your employees to go out there and to be leaders, they're never going to take control. If they're always looking over their shoulder, waiting for that next shoe to drop, or waiting to be tapped and said, hey, you're doing it wrong, that's not a good thing. That's really a poor structure for transferring leadership. I say this all the time. There are two types of owner. There's an owner operator and an owner manager. You cannot be both. You cannot be hands-on in the business and also be a manager. You have to either make the decision that you're going to be involved in everything, or you're going to be involved in very little. So you have to say to yourself first, what personality trait am I? Dick and I have worked with companies over the years, even before we started CREST. We've worked with companies where the owner wanted to be an owner manager, but his psyche couldn't handle it. And he ended up crashing and burning. In one case, the company closed. In another case, the owner had to sell because the company was so successful, but the owner was losing sleep at night because he wasn't intimately involved. We've got companies that we work with on a daily basis where the owner is out on the truck handling the jobs. We have other companies that are CREST members where the owners are doing 500 or 600 jobs a year, and they probably don't know the names of 10 clients. You have to say to yourself, which one are you? Not just which one would you like to be, but which one are you in reality? If you want your managers to take more control, you have to be the type that's willing to give it to them. My expression is, you will always do something 100% perfect because you're the guide, you're the judge, you're the person who's making that determination. If you want to be a manager, you have to be willing to accept 90%. You have to be willing to accept the fact that no manager can do things perfectly on your scale because you are the only one who can do it perfectly on your scale. They will never be able to do it as well as you by your logic. Now, if I'm the third party judging it, I'll tell you most times the managers are doing it better than the owners. They're taking that leadership and control to heart, and they're doing a much better job. But unfortunately, owners don't get to see that because there's a lot of subjectivity involved. So you have to be willing to step back, and in your own head, you have to be willing to say, okay, I'm willing to accept 90% of me, because if I could step back and accept 90% of me, then I could scale my company. I can leverage my abilities. I can have more managers handling more work so that I'm doing less, but my company is actually growing. So if you want to make it happen, have a really, really good heart-to-heart with yourself. Now, there are ways we can do this. Dick Wagner has the ability to offer to you a personality test. You can take a simple test, and Dick can work it out with you guys. And you can take a simple test that'll tell you what your predetermination is. It doesn't mean that you can't be a good manager from afar or a good, delegator of responsibility. If you score against it, it just means that this is something you need to be aware of, what your natural tendencies are. So if you're interested in something like that, I found them to be very effective over the years, and they really, really will help you understand yourself so that you can better build a good team. So think about what you want out of your business and think about what you can handle. If you can handle being able to say, I don't have to be in control, your managers will take control. If they need a little guidance, that's something Dick and I can offer to you as well as CREST members. We can sit with them. We can offer some guidance. There are some great programs, some great books, some great webinars that we can lead you to help you with that. Just let us know if we can help in any way. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you all of the folks that were watching. On behalf of the CREST network, I want to say thank you. And I'm sure that Bill will volunteer his thank you as well. We hope that you learned some valuable info from this. For those of you that know or don't know, rather, we try to do a webinar every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Sometimes the webinar is a repeat. It's the best of, it's already pre-recorded. And usually we put on there on those pre-recorded or recorded videos, the most popular ones. We track them in YouTube and see which ones got the most visits, and we will often put those on there. And then Bill and I, usually once a month, will do a question and answer section, which is what we did today. So on behalf of Bill Giannone and myself, Dick Wagner, thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.